which was just fascinating. I'm a constitutional lawyer. Case after case after case, especially in the Supreme Court of Canada and Court of Appeal levels, the court says, we're not going to decide this because you didn't bring enough evidence to show the broad purpose and effect. Courts have said, we're not going to strike down laws for being unconstitutional unless you show us really how the law operates, how it affects people, not the parties per se, because it doesn't have to affect you. It can still be unconstitutional. So, we've got all these cases saying you need to lead this evidence, but when the court's in a bind, they said, oh, you don't have standing, we're going to exclude this evidence. And then, so when all the evidence is gone, basically it's behind the court now, and the court's looking, and the sun's shining, and there's blue sky, and the birds are singing, well, I don't see a problem. I'm not striking down this law. I don't see a constitutional violation. So we appeal this to the Federal Court of Appeal. And the main ground of our appeal is the judge shouldn't have excluded the evidence. I cannot find another case in Canada where the issue is the judge should not have excluded this evidence, where the evidence isn't filed in the court. Because the court has to look at the evidence, figure out, is it relevant, should it have been admitted? But the Federal Court of Appeal did not allow us to file that evidence. And they said, you know what we're going to do, Mr. Buckley? We're going to break this appeal into two parts. And a part one will determine should you have been allowed to file the evidence in the lower court. And if you are, then later on, we'll argue, was there a constitutional violation? So we show up on the first day to argue, well, should we have been able to file this evidence? And the court says, well, we'll assume you had that right. Don't file it. We don't see constitutional violation and threw us out. So it's just really interesting. It's the worst case I've ever seen where, government action actually led to deaths, and it was just, they knew what they were doing. It, in my opinion, was criminal negligence and people should be in jail. But the courts wouldn't even hear it. So it just kind of raises the question then, what do you do as a citizen if you can't go to court and get recourse? We're basically losing the rule of law, and we're just seeing this pattern, and it's a real problem, and you need to be aware of it. Okay, so one trend is we're losing kind of our democratic oversight over our food safety and our drug safety. Second thing is we're losing our access to the courts. The third thing, and I'm just about out of time, so I'll be very brief, is I just wanted to share that we're basically in the process of losing most of our natural remedies. So back before 2004, natural health products were, for all intents and purposes, unregulated. So whenever you walked into the health food store and bought something, the government didn't approve it. Okay, it was kind of like a black market, but it was left alone because the only regulations were the chemical drug regulations, and you couldn't get through that, and so people didn't really try. Well, they come out with new regulations in 2004 that now before you can sell, you're supposed to make a claim and convince Health Canada you have evidence, scientific evidence, and that the thing's safe. And the long and the short of it is about half of the products that we have access to, people aren't even trying to get through this process because they just know they're going to fail and don't have the resources. And of the half that basically are trying to get through the process, roughly half are failing. And so products are coming off the market. We probably already lost about 30,000 products. US products, there's whole companies that will no longer sell to us. And the problem is, with this, is there's a health consequence. I mean, I talked about the True Hope case, which is just one example. Do you care if I just share one more story? Okay, because I don't know if is it okay?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So because I just don't know, am I tiring you out or anything like that? But it's really how I got involved in kind of being aware that natural products need to be protected and then starting to fight Health Canada. So I was there was a herbalist, Jim Strauss in Kamloops, who's now deceased. Any of you know of Jim Strauss? Okay, a couple. So, well, he's an interesting fellow, but I won't go into his background, but Health Canada hated this guy, and by and large because he would be treating heart disease with his heart drops. And so what happened importing a bunch of herbs from the United States. These are all herbs that were legal to own. So any of us could have ordered them and no problem, they're legal. But Health Canada seized them at the border and basically took them because they didn't want him formulating them into remedies. Now in the legal community, there's a very technical term to describe when one party takes the property of another party without their consent. You may not have heard of this term, but in the legal community, we call that theft. So, yeah. So basically, Health Canada stole his herbs, right? So he sues Health Canada to get these herbs back. He's suing in the town he lives in, Kamloops. There's no Department of Justice there, so a local law firm is hired. And I just happen to work at that firm, and the file's thrown at me saying, well, you're acting for Health Canada, and you go and defend Health Canada against this herbalist. So I was happy to do it, because I was in the mainstream paradigm where, like, I grew up in a family, if you got sick, you went to the medical doctor, and you got a chemical prescribed, like, just no idea. And, you know, we're kind of raised to believe the government's there to help us and all of this. So to me, the idea that you could allow this rogue herbalist to sell remedies that aren't approved just seemed to me to be a dangerous idea. I mean, I'm ashamed to say that now. So I go to court and I have his thing thrown out. He was in the wrong court, actually. And glad to do it because, as I say, I thought it was actually helping people, you know, protecting all of us from this rogue herbalist. But him and we got along really well. In fact, I get his thing thrown out of court and he takes me for lunch. Like, you know, but a different breed, right? So a little while after, he gets charged with practicing medicine without a license and he hires me to defend him. So now I'm on the other side. So it's just, and this was kind of my road to Damascus experience. Because what happened is the doctors were getting pissed off that he was, you know, curing people with heart disease. And the law in BC that gives doctors their medical monopoly, says only doctors can practice medicine, defines the practice of medicine to include making treatment claims. And he was claiming he could cure heart disease. In fact, he drove around town in a white van with big red letters, "We cure heart disease." And so I'm looking at this going, how am I going to defend him? Because the law says you can't make a claim unless you're a doctor. I can't get him to shut up. Like back then, you know, all the judges in Kamloops were old men. And if I would have thrown him on the stand, you know what he would have done? I know it, is he would have looked at the judge and noticed the judge has the crow feet on his ears, which is a sure sign of, you know, heart problems. And he would have said in his, you know, Austrian accent, "Your Honor, you have heart disease. You need my heart drops." I mean, I know he would have done that. So I'm going, how am I going to defend this guy? I don't want him to go down. So I decided, you know, I need to attack the law. Because here we have this law saying you can't make treatment claims, even truthful ones. And we've got a Charter of Rights and Freedoms saying we have freedom of expression. So I let the government know that we were going to ask the court to strike down the law, which all of a sudden now I'm against a team of lawyers. It happens every time. And I set to prepare for trial. And so I go and I meet Jim and I say, "Jim, is there any way we can show that you're actually telling the truth, like that you do cure heart disease? Because we're going to have, you know, better luck if we can do that." He doesn't even miss a beat. He goes in the back of his herb shop and he brings me out boxes. And I don't remember now, 3 boxes, 5 boxes. They were filled with letters that people had just felt compelled to write him.
Affidavits?
Well, they're not affidavits.
Well, almost.
I mean, they're letters where people wrote in, and there were thousands of these letters, and really they were all the same. I had heart disease, I took your heart drops, I got well, like thank you, a whole bunch of God bless yous, all of this. Those letters are useless for me in court. I cannot enter them, pure hearsay. But I can call the authors of the letters, they can take the stand, swear to tell the truth, and then tell the truth. And that's actually the highest level of evidence in a criminal court. So I start phoning these people and interviewing. It was like a witness field day. I can't call 1,000 witnesses. So I narrowed it down to 5. In preparing and interviewing and, you know, narrowing it down and then prepping these witnesses, I had to do a complete paradigm shift. Because when I had this guy thrown out of court, I was thinking the danger was allowing this guy to sell his heart drops, you know, because it's snake oil. Well, at the end of that trial, it had for me been a complete reversal, because the real danger I realized was taking those heart drops off the market. And at the time, I could have given you the names, addresses, and phone numbers of thousands of people whose lives would have been dramatically impacted, some of who would have died. And so we're actually talking about life and death. We're talking about serious health issues. It's funny now, every time I lecture in Ontario, there's a skeptics group that sends people to disrupt my lectures, to deliberately disrupt. But what started happening is the crowd would start yelling at them and shut them down, and then all of a sudden people would start standing up and giving stories. And the stories are all the same. I had a serious health condition, I went through all the approved treatments, either they didn't work or the side effects were worse, and then I find a natural remedy and I'm well. And that's why I'm here. And it's like, why are we taking this away? Like, shouldn't we have the right to decide how we're going to treat ourselves when we're sick? You see, because if we don't, we're slaves, right? And so philosophically, you have to understand that what's happening on a wider scale is purposely designed to enslave you because the government views us as sheep. There's no other explanation for it. And so I think, when these laws are happening, when we're losing access and things like that, you have to take a step back and look at the more wider picture is, okay, for them to do that, what do they have to be? What's their philosophical belief and understanding? Because it all goes back to them. And our governments are becoming tremendously adversarial. There's huge health effects. I mean, for all the positive stories, I get calls from people and stories of people who have died because they can't get access to things anymore. It's life and death. And the problem I have is most people are just sitting on their, I was going to use the A word, but butts, and doing nothing, right? And we have to start becoming active, because the truth is this group here is probably more proactive and awake than the average. If we got 1,000 people off the street, most wouldn't even have a clue what's going on. But even that said, in the last 12 months, how many of you have actually written a physical letter to an MP or an MLA? Okay, like a couple, right?
12 months. Well,
last 12 months. And how many have actually, taken the time to go and meet with a lawmaker over an issue that's passionate in the last 12 months? So we got one. And, so you see the problem, right? As exhausting as it is, I think, when you hear about, I'm just speaking, but there'll be GMOs and, sovereignty issues and things like that. On all of these issues, we have to start becoming more active. And I'll just stop there. I've kind of exceeded my time. I'm sorry.
Can I just...
Sure. Yeah. So we'll start here and then go.
Okay. I would just like to, first of all, thank you, Shawn, for your work and for your dedication. And just,
can you speak up?
Your commitment to the truth and the light. It's really impressive for somebody in your position as a lawyer to do that. And because I know the training that lawyers go through to keep them in the box. So I just want to...
Well, that's just an interesting question. It is because, I don't know, usually there's somebody else that's gone through law school. Really, my experience was it was just to teach you what the law in theory is and, technical skills, but didn't really deal with, the basis and what's really... we all know there's more going on than meets the eye. And, the unfortunate thing is in like you and I get into a dispute, whether it's over property or, you've stolen my car or something, there has to be some mechanism of resolving. So, we need some type of system, but it's interesting that the governments just assume they have power over us, right?
And my second part was to ask, in your view, what can we do as individuals and strategically in this movement to reclaim our health rights?
That's a good question. So did everyone hear his question is what can we do? My fight is to keep access to our natural remedies. So, and I'm part of an organization called the Natural Health Products Protection Association. Just Google NHPPA or Natural Health Products Protection and you'll find us. And you can give us your email address. And why that's important is, we might not email you for a year, but we want to know, we've got this list that if we need something, we can do it. So for instance, Kevin was talking about how this, Consumer Product Protection Act, we defeated it a few times. Well, I was the only person, there were two people called to the Senate. It got through the House of Commons fine. There were two people called to the Senate out, I think there was 50 witnesses, 2 against, and one was against on trade reasons. So I was really the only one on rights issues. The Senate was not going to call me. And then they got thousands of letters and calls and emails because of, we can send alerts out saying we need you to pressure the Senate. And then the Senate amended it and sent it back to the House. So we stalled it for almost a year. Member Harper prorogued for the Olympics and appointed new senators. Not one of them called me to thank me for their appointment. But they were appointed so they could get that act through. They needed the majority, right? So it's just an example. We need to know who we can count on when there is a push. Right now there's not a push, right? There's not a Bill C-51 back or anything like that. So please go to the website nhppa.org, give us your contact particulars so that when we do need that army out there, you're there. And you know, if you can support us financially, great, right? Because the reality is, you know, when I go for lectures and stuff like that, we pay our own travel usually because we're willing to come to small events. And it's just, you know, it's got to be paid for, and running ads and educating people, it's just a cost. And it's just, if you're not willing to share that burden, then are you really willing to do anything? Like, you know, so find those groups that resonate with you and support them. Like, and, you know, but be personally active and keep up on your education. So, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, do you personally believe the government is acting out of conscience for what they're doing, or are they motivated by something else?
Well, what do you mean out of conscience?
Well, doing what they feel is right to protect the common, person.
Well, let me ask you that question. You see, because I always get kind of questions like that, and it's just, the thing is I don't know, do I? Like, I mean, I know that what they're doing doesn't make sense. We're told it's for our safety, but the opposite is true. And I know when you pass laws and take powers away from elected politicians and move it into, you know, the bureaucracy, you allow for more corruption that's going to be unseen. And when you allow for exemptions to food safety laws secretly, I mean, there's a problem. We all know that things, not just in the food and drug front, but on every front, I mean, we are losing freedoms that, could you imagine we would have lost them? I mean, who has privacy now?
So what do you feel
So, you know, but
motivating
so,
the government
like,
to become
why
an enemy
is
of
it
the common
happening?
man or a common woman?
I'm sorry?
What is motivating the government to do these things?
Well, what do you think? Because your answer is as good as mine, because you see what's going on as well as I do. It's not like I have an insider saying, oh yeah, here's the plan and here's why.
Is it like the States where the big corporations have powerful lobbyists and they...
Well, you know, I mean, when you hear people like Dr. Shiv Chopra lecture, he talks about the corporate influence on our drug approval process. We were in Washington, D.C. doing lobbying. This is probably about 7 years ago, and I forget which. We met with a senator who was sympathetic to, they call them dietary supplements. And he had to leave, and then his senior aide said, "Don't leave, guys. I need to talk to you guys." And this guy had been an aide to senators for his whole career. He was probably early 50s, and he said, "You have to know that." At the time, I think there was 1.5 full-time pharmaceutical lobbyists for every senator and congressman, which is interesting. So you have more full-time lobbyists than you actually have lawmakers. And he says they are so influential that he says the lawmakers actually pay attention to the share price of the pharmaceutical companies.